Hello and welcome to another video, and I'm rather hot in this room tonight, absolutely sweating. It's quite warm out there, but I've been running around and trying to get this video out on time. Not sure, it's probably looking more Wednesday that this isn't come out. No, I do apologise, but spent the weekend up at Liverpool, and this is the Liverpool video, and we're mainly looking around like Albert Dock Way, but I'm also going to include Chapel Street. And that's because Chapel Street has quite a dark history and a tragic history. So we're not going to hang around, so we're going to get straight into the video now. So totally by coincidence, I ended up booking the hotel that we stayed at, and it was at Chapel Street. And I knew a little bit of the history about the church, and to be honest, I've got hands up here, I did not know how dark a history it had. Now, I knew there were some reports about some ghosts around the outside of it all, but when I looked into the research, the history of it, I was quite shocked, and it is quite sad, and there's reasons why these ghosts remain there today. So the Church of Our Lady and St Nicholas was originally built in 1355 on this site, and it was worshipped, but over the years more and more developments happened to that church, and it's actually developed over a century. Unfortunately, on the 11th of February 1810, local children in the area were at a service, and the girls were up one end and the boys were at the other end, and the bell tower was ringing and ringing. Apparently they had been warned that some cracks had been found in the bell tower, but they were ignored. During this service, the bell tower collapsed straight down through the church roof and into the nave, and this ended the lives of 28 children. Most of them were girls, because the boys were at one end and the girls happened to be where the spire fell through. Now, while I was up there, I went out and the church was ringing its bell, and it sort of struck those sort of memories back about what happened. I didn't know how many people actually died there, and I was quite shocked that it was 28. And I see other reports that around about 26, 29, 30, so it differs depending on what report you read onto, but I found 28. The other thing I noticed while I was up there, you could actually go for a walk through the tunnels underneath the church. This would probably be the crypt, and I didn't really look into it. I wasn't planning on going through those tunnels and having a look around there, because to be truthful, most of my focus was on Albert Dock, and that's what I've done all the research on and had all the ghost stories for. And I was only going to spend a little bit on the chapel on the outside, mainly due to two stories that I know of. From about 1820, it was said that the bells could still be heard ringing, despite the fact that there's no bell tower there and definitely no bells. The original bell was destroyed in that fall. But over the decades to come, it was often said that they could hear these bells for the night time, and especially around February time when the disaster happened. And there's a lot of tales when you go through the history of Liverpool. It comes up Chapel Street. Chapel Street is well known because of this disaster and the bells of Chapel Street. One thing I did find was the report of a local baker. Now, this was in 1910, and he was riding his bike along through Chapel Street, and as he got to the bottom of it, he started to hear the bells. Now, the tower had been rebuilt, but the bells were not installed for another 2 years in 1912. He thought this was rather strange, and he stopped his bike. This was early hours of the morning, and as he stood by the side of the church, now this is a lower part of the wall, but I had a garden now. I believe there's been some redevelopment with the church wall. It's not how it was then as it is now. And he stood by the church wall. He was listening out for the bells to strike again to make sure he wasn't hearing things. And yes, again the bells started to ring. But what he started to hear was the sobbing of some girls in the churchyard. And he was quite worried about this. He got off his bike, walked round, went up into the churchyard and was trying to find these girls. After 5 minutes of searching and having no luck in trying to locate them, he started to panic, because he could definitely hear these girls sobbing, and he thought they may be being trapped inside the church or in the crypt. So he got on his bike and he rode off to the police station. He got to the police station and begged two officers to come with him. They went back down to the churchyard, and he was walking around with them trying to identify where the sound was coming from. When he returned to the police officers, they couldn't hear anything at all. They thought he'd overreacted and they left, but he was quite convinced that he had heard these girls. Over the next few days, he returned to the Chapel Street. He stood in the churchyard to see if he could hear the girls again. One Thursday night, he returned there with his wife. His wife was up by the gateway. He was walking around the church to see if he could hear anything. When his wife called out his name, she said, "Come here and have a listen." He approached where his wife was standing, and yes, again, the sound of these sobbing children could be heard. He actually got on his hands and knees and started making his way up around the churchyard to see where the sound was coming from. He was convinced the sound of the crying of these girls was coming from underneath the chapel. Yet, when the police had been there, they actually searched the chapel and nothing was in there. Again, they returned to the police station with his wife, convincing them to come down to the churchyard. They had the chapel unlocked and they searched all over the place for these sounds of these girls, and nothing was ever found. In the winter of 1956, something similar happened. Over the period of 4 weeks in February, numerous reports of crying children were heard in the churchyard. Now, the police has been alerted quite a few times, and they were taking regular trips around there to see if they could identify these sounds. It seems they were not familiar with the tales of this ghost story, because maybe one of them would have cottoned on what was going on. But at the end of February, one couple had been in the church, they'd been in there for a service, they'd come out, and as they exited the church doors, they could hear this sobbing and actually quite a high-pitched crying sound. This stopped them in their tracks, and they turned around and said to other people, "Can you hear that?" Nobody else coming out of the church could hear anything. The lady was quite put off. She let everybody disappear. She went up to the vicar and said, "I heard a crying sound," and he was not dismissive. He turned around and said, "Well, I'll have a look around to make sure nobody is locked here, and I'll check everything." Not letting on. Now, I'm assuming the vicar knew all what was going on. Vicar, priest, whatever you want to call them, knew the history of this building and may not have been letting on what it could be. Now, I don't blame him for that. Maybe he didn't want to concern them or worry them. They left this in his hands. 2 days later, they decided to come back to that church to have a look for themselves. Now, apparently this was quite a snowy day, and they was walking around the churchyard, and at the time the snow was completely unbroken. On their first pass around the church, they didn't hear anything. While they ran to one side, they started to hear the crying of these children. As they walked back round to the main door, there was children's bare footprints in the snow all around the entrance of the door. Again, they could hear the crying of the children. Again, they reported it to the police. Again, the police come down, and when the police got there, all the footprints in the snow had gone. Now, they had not melted, they just disappeared. By this time, the police were looking at each other going, "Are these people crazy? Are they making it up?" Only a few years later after that, we have another gentleman that may be not worse for wear, but he was coming home on an evening on a Friday that was passing the church and could hear children crying and screaming. He walked around the churchyard, he called the police. 2 police officers turned up in a patrol car. They got out and they said to him, "What's the matter?" He said, "I can hear children crying around this area." Then another police car turns up and the officer gets out, an older officer, walks up and said, "Don't worry lads, we don't need to be looking. These are ghost children. These are the children that died in a tragic accident here, and the people you're looking for are well gone and you're never going to find them." Now, you can't go to Liverpool without talking about the Liver building. Now, this is directly opposite the chapel, and my hotel, I had a beautiful view out over the Liver building, and I'd done some research on the history of that before going there. And despite the reports I'd been told over the years, I could not find any official reports of hauntings there on Liverpool's websites and all this other stuff. In books, there's lots of ghost stories, but on their tours and all this sort of stuff, there's very limited stuff documented on websites. Using my books and the research over the years, I'm going to add a few of the tales that I've heard there, particularly mainly one, and this dates back to only 40 years, and this report was from 1985. A little bit about the Liver building. It was for the Liver Group and it was built in 1911. Now, during that time, it was around the dock areas and it gave a perfect office space for them to work from, and it's an absolutely stunning building. From what I know, it seems that not a dark, tragic history in that building, but an event may have taken place in one of the offices, mainly because of this ghost story. And the story is that a female clerk is often seen walking around the floors as if she's lost, but when approached she disappears. Other people say as she passes through the offices, as she gets to one end, she passes through doors as if they wasn't there. Now this is 1985, I guess the offices have been changed since 1911 when it was built, maybe reconstruction's gone inside, but it seems that she still follows the path that she walks. Digging around in the old ghost history books that I have, they blame this on the death of a female clerk in 1945. In May 1945, a female clerk that had been working in the offices, her body was found floating in the dockyard. And people assumed that she may have taken her own life, but when she was dragged out, they found that she had actually been strangled. She hadn't been seen coming out of the offices. The last reported sighting of her was actually while she was still working up in the office. People did assume that maybe someone in there had been linked to it. Reading again in the history books, no one was ever charged with this, but the rumour was that it may have been the office manager there that had been having an affair with her, and she threatened to tell his wife. And to this day, she's said to still haunt those office blocks. Just on a side note, now my wife pointed this out to me. We're in our hotel room and we didn't overlook the Liverpool building, we looked over a office block. And my wife goes, "That's really bizarre." I went, "What?" And she goes, "The lights have just come on in the office opposite and they're all flashing." She goes, "There is somebody cleaning downstairs, but all those office lights are all going on and off in a weird sequence. It wasn't as if they were like flickering bulbs, or they were literally triggering on and off. Something that I've never really seen before." And yeah, it was quite creepy. And I will say that we filmed it here, and the next night, round about, we'd been out. We didn't get back till quite late, so it must have been about 11 o'clock, half 11. We looked out our bedroom window and the lights come on, and again the tower block lights were flickering, only on one floor of these offices. And it was quite spooky, and being as I was up there filming these videos, I thought it was quite apt, so I took a few videos of it and I stuck it in here for you to have a look at it. It just seemed quite strange to me. The other ghost of the Liverpool building is actually not inside the building, it's outside the building. Now apparently in the 1920s it wasn't common to see a shoe sign. In the 1920s, it wasn't uncommon to see a shoe shine boy sitting outside the Liverpool building, waiting to clean the shoes of the office workers coming in and out. Unfortunately, the rumour goes is that one evening this boy met his end in some form, and his body was dragged out the docks in the morning. His body was found over by the pump house, not near the Liverpool building, and it's some distance from there, but over the years people have reported seeing the figure of this boy up against the wall with a box waiting to shine shoes. For some reason, most of these reports happened in the 60s. I don't know if something had triggered this, but there was a spate of these reports of people walking around that building and the outside of that building during the day and seeing a young lad sitting in the corner waiting for someone to come up and shine their waiting for someone to come up and shine their shoes. Now, I'm not joking you. The amount of times I've had to say shine their shoes and had to cut it and redo it because it seems I'm unable to say those two words together. So I'm struggling. But yes, the story is that this young lad haunts alongside that building. I wasn't able to actually pick up exactly where that ghost is meant to be. It is just around the front of that building. So a little story there. As I say, the Liverpool building hasn't got many stories linked to it. As I say, now the Liverpool building, for the age of it, it's 1911. You'd expect there'd be a lot more stories and maybe ghost stories surrounding it. Again, going by my old books, there's stuff in there. Online, there's nothing. So I'm not going to add stuff to there that I'm not confident about. So I've added a couple there that I think are more founded in actual reported events and documented events, and not just ones I'm dragging off the internet. Now, when I'm dragging stuff on the internet, I'm not literally poo-pooing all the stories on there, because a lot of them have just clipped information out of the ghost tours that go on around the area, and they've made their own little one. There's one about Albert Dock. Now, we're going to cover Albert Dock in depth, but, well, not really in depth, but a lot of ghost stories around there. There's one in Albert Dock, and it's a hotel along the side, and apparently in the 2000s and something, a mother and son chose to stay in a hotel along there, and the mum brought a phone, and she was reprogramming the phone that she just brought in the hotel room. She got up and went and had a shower before finishing setting it up, and her son picked the phone up and was flicking through. When she come back out, the son was laying flat out cold on the bed. She picked the phone up, started to finish reprogramming it, and noticed that there's a terrifying picture of her son's face with a horrible face behind it. That's what's on. I've seen on other stuff. I seen the photo, and yeah, I do. I'm not going to poo-poo it again. I'll let you make. Do you know what? I'm going to see if I can find the photo out. I'm going to whack it up on here. I'll let you make your own mind up of that story. Now, the other one is a sad one. Again, I'm not too sure the facts of this. Now, this is the merry-go-round that is over in the docks. Now, the old merry-go-round at the docks, apparently, in the 1920s, a young girl was on that merry-go-round and got struck by lightning and she died. And she is said to haunt the new merry-go-round in that area. Again, I've got no evidence for that. This is a story that is put out there, and like the one with the wheel in Liverpool now, not like the Millennium Wheel in London. This one's a lot smaller, but people say that they see terrifying faces when they go around on the wheel. So you've got a lot of stories around Liverpool like that. But when I come to the research I like the older ones, so like Mermaid House or the Pier Master's house. It looks creepy and it's got great history. Obviously, this was such an important building during that period of time. This is where all the controlling of the piers and the docks went on from. It was the master's place. It had a very, very important stature. Staff over the years have told you that the building may be cursed, that things have been set up in there after it stopped being used as a pier master's house have not worked out. And it now has its Mermaid House, where you've got the museum, the Maritime Museum. And I will say that every time I've gone up there to try and visit that museum, it's been shut. Something is happening. They're redeveloping. They're doing something. It never seems to be open, and I've never actually been able to get in and have a look at it. But I do know that staff that have been in there and worked there and don't work there no more turn around and say that they feel very, very creepy walking around that building. Not just inside the building, but outside the building. So when they're locking up for the night time, when they're coming out, they feel as if somebody is staring at them. And two staff members locked up together one night, and as they're coming out, they turn their back to see what they describe as a full-blown apparition of a sailor standing there. They say it was a stereotype sailor with the jacket, the cap, and a rucksack on his shoulder, and it frightened the life out of them before vanishing. Now, the other story we have around that area on Mermaid House, Pier Master's house, is to do with the windows. There are just so many reports, people of an evening seeing ghostly figures looking out that window. Now, this is the postmaster's house. Is he still there? Is he still looking out, checking on what's going on in the harbour? I think I said postmaster's house. It's the pier master's house. So a lot of people reported, many people reported, over the years seeing faces, ghostly faces, in the windows of Mermaid House. And I walk around here now having a look and sticking the camera, I think, in some of the windows. I can't remember. I'll look back at the footage. I remember having a nose for the windows myself. I'm not sure I filmed there, hoping to see a figure looking back at me. And I don't know what I would have done if a figure did look back at me when I looked through that window, but wasn't really thinking about that at the time. Yeah, it would have been rather creepy. It would make great filming if I caught it on film, wouldn't it? But yeah, a lot of people do report seeing these faces, as if the pier master is still looking out and keeping an eye over all those docks. Now, skipping over Albert Dock and going to the far end of the docks, we have the pump house. Now, originally built in 1870, this was a purpose-built unit to provide power to the docks, and it seems that it may have a dark tale attached to it. Now, it seems that many people may have gone missing who worked in that pump house over the years. We do know that now that staff have worked there over the years don't like locking up, and they do report seeing ghostly apparitions walking through the bar area. Doing a little bit of research on this, I did find one that popped up on the BBC website, and I did find it quite comical, and I'm going to read it to you as I found it on there. Frank, dock worker. I worked down on the docks for many years. The only ghost story I remember being petrified of working on the North Sea Gladstone, because the old pump house was supposed to be haunted by one of the old pump attendants, and I was scared of working nights over there, and people working there were seeing things. I've never seen it myself. We're scared of working nights over there. It was one of the eerie places anyway. That Gladstone put me down the pump house. If that ship wasn't facing towards that number one, everyone was petrified. What I understand about number one is actually the port. So if it wasn't facing away from the pump house, it seems that everyone was petrified of working there. Other reports what I've seen is that yes, they do believe this area was cursed. Sailors would avoid going around by that pump house. What is it that made them so petrified of that building? Something must have happened. I do know that one evening, two sailors sitting on the boat waiting in the dock looked over to the pump house to see a glowing figure of a man standing by the doors of the building, that then slowly faded back through the doors. Other people turned around and said that the smoke pumping out that chimney would turn from white to black in the flick of an eye before returning back to white again. Apparently that wasn't meant to happen, and that used to freak a lot of the sailors out there, and maybe a part of this thing about being a cursed place. Some sailors would refuse to go working on those ships that were docked near that pump house, and it became a bit of a sailor's tradition to avoid them docking their boat near there. Now, it seems a bit overkill. I know that staff that have worked there over the years didn't like it. They felt creepy, and they would feel as if they'd been watched. Some people felt as if they'd almost been spied upon while they were working, and as they went to leave the building, they felt as if someone was shoving them out the door. So you've got a lot of these little stories around the pump house, and about, again, not really traditional pub stories. There are some reports of glasses and that sort of stuff being smashed and falling off, but mainly about this thing of being watched and observed, and feeling not being welcomed by something in there and pushed them out. And this ghostly apparition of this sailor is meant to be seen looking out the windows again of a night time. So we do have more modern reports of people walking there when that pump house is shut. As I say, it's now a pub, and it's lovely. We went now, it's a really lovely pub. But people have said once that's shut, about 2 o'clock in the morning, you walk past and you can see a glowing figure of a man inside that pub. Again, these are reports you can find about and have a dig around and try and find more history on it. Again, is this attendant that lost his life there? Is he still there? Is he the one haunting it? But I found it a beautiful building and in a beautiful setting. And there's one thing I'll say about the docks and all that in Liverpool. It is stunning and incredibly clean. The whole city front was absolutely spotless. Never been to a place more clean than Liverpool front. The dock area is just incredible. Years ago, I used to go up there watching a lot of football games, and yeah, the dockyard weren't like that then. I tell you, it's totally different and very, very impressive. Now, the next building we've got to talk about is again is on the side of Albert Dock, and that is the pilot house. This is the house that the pilot would live in, and he would come out and help the ship's dock. What we have is a rather disturbing story of the night watchman out there. Now, there's a hut out there where the night watchman would be. He was on watch right by the pilot's house when he could hear somebody struggling in the water below. He looked over. What he could see was an old sailor below in the water, struggling to breathe, but finally making his way onto the mud bank and dragging himself out. Now, this sailor then disappeared. But after that period of time, of an evening, that watchman would either be in the pilot's house or in the watch house, and a figure of that sailor would come and stand by the window and stare through to that watchman. Absolutely petrified him, frightened the life out of him. In the pilot's house, the same thing was happening, that this sailor was looking through the windows. And to this day, he said that this sailor haunts around that building and the old little watchtower. Looking back, I can't find any record of this, but I'm going to say this now. The amount of ghosts attributed to people drowning along that waterfront is massive. There's loads. I walk along here and I was planning on telling you certain stories about people that are seen struggling in the water. Then I decided I'm not going to do them individually. I'm just going to say that along that side of the Mersey, along by where the ferry port is, that there are lots of reports of people hearing people scream, struggling, and they've looked at, you've got a mud bank up to the edge, or even worse, that they're looking over and the water is so dark they can't see anybody but can still hear the voices. Even to a point where people have been throwing in the life preservers over, like the circular buoys, into the water expecting somebody to grab it because they know they're throwing it exactly where that voice is coming from and nobody ever turning up. We have a report in 2020 where a family were down there and they could hear somebody struggling in the water. They put a torch on the water to see if they could see somebody. They threw the buoy over and the screaming continued even where they were shining the light where they could hear the sound coming from and there was nobody there. We've got a lot of reports like this along that front of the docks. Okay, so let's get more into Albert Dock now, and we'll start off with maybe one of the better known ghost stories, and that is of the hanging sailor. So the story goes, in the 18th century, a sailor found himself in dire straits and in absolutely massive debt, and for some reason people would not take him on their ship. They would see him as a curse. So now the docks wasn't totally built up around that time, but was still being used as a port. As I say, he was an untouchable sailor. People didn't want to use him. One evening he felt he had no options and ended it by hanging off of a sailboat in the docks. From that day on, the ghost of the hanging sailor was born. It's been reported over the decades that this sailor is seen of a morning hanging from one of the masts in the dock. Now, while we talk about that, there is a thing about the ghost ship of Albert Dock. Now, people say that from time to time this huge ghostly liner is meant to be seen pulling into Albert Dock or coming alongside the Mersey where the Albert Dock is. Other people will tell you that there's a ghost ship that is seen in Albert Dock that this sailor is seen to be hanging from the mast. So much so that when Liverpool had celebrations in the dock, they'd done a ghost ship mock-up using lasers and spray to image a ship in that dockyard, a ghost ship. So they take it quite seriously, these stories about ghost ships along Liverpool and along Mersey. Again, the huge liner, I couldn't find any record of what this huge liner was that was meant to be haunting that dock. But again, as you walk through Albert Dock, there's always diagrams of all these ships that have used it, sat on the benches and all that, because the history is just so massive there that, there's so many ships would have been lost at sea and liners from there would have been lost at sea. Is it possible we have a ghost ship trying to dock over Albert Dock now? That's something I would love to see, because again, it reminds me of Ghostbusters 2 when the Titanic arrives in New York. So that would be a sight for sore eyes, wouldn't it? You see one of them put up. But again, moving on, one of the things we have about Albert Dock is a lot of bridges across it. I was going to tell you these individual stories, but again, there's quite a few, and so I'm going to stick to the ones that I'm confident with, that I've got more sort of foundation on. Now, Albert Dock wasn't fully open till 1846, and unfortunately we had a world war, 2 world wars after that, but during World War II it was heavily bombed, and there was a lot of casualties that happened along that riverfront that gives you that possibility of ghosts and paranormal activity. A lot of people will tell you that they will see Victorian ladies and World War II ladies walking along that waterfront, and some are very, very smartly dressed. Others are sort of like the female war uniforms, as if they've lost their life during a bombing. A lot of buildings were destroyed around there. In the dock itself, we have two conflicting reports. We have the first bridge as you come into the dock from the Liverpool building end, and as you go across there, the original building, the original bridge is gone, and now you've got a new modern one. I think it's 1984, 1994, the new bridge was built. But the foundations of the old ones are still there. You can see the cutouts where the gates would have been and where the bridge would have gone across. So it's still in the same position, which means that this report is still possible. So only 6 years ago, we have the report of a policeman, which interests me straight away, seeing a lady walking along that bridge and then jumping off. He runs over and looks over the other side and can't see anybody in the water. He turns around and he says to other people, "Did you see her? Did you see her? Did you see where she went?" And people said, "What are you on about?" He goes, "I see a lady jump in here." And they're like, "No, we've been looking over it all the time and nobody went in there." And apparently they checked the CCTV and this lady doesn't show up. Yet you see the policeman running up and looking as if somebody's jumped into the water. Go back to the 1970s, we have a report very, very similar of somebody witnessing somebody jumping into that dock and people running over to try and save her, and to find again that there's nobody down there. Obviously, there's been a lot of bodies pulled out of that dock. Now, going through the history and researching the history of this, there are newspaper reports of bodies being pulled out of the dock, and maybe people that have come to ill harm being dumped in that dock. And not just that dock, but a lot of docks. The other bridge on the other side, heading out towards the pump houses, you've got the other bridge that again has very, very similar reports of people jumping off and going missing but never being found. So it seems a very common little trait. Albert Dock itself is quite confusing when it comes to the ghost stories. The building and the upper buildings have obviously all been redeveloped, so you'd think there won't be much left up there. But again, people using those upper buildings and the offices and the hotels that are taking them over now all report of paranormal activity throughout the whole of those buildings. Nothing massive, but there is one right down the end. Now at the moment, this is ironically where we've got sort of a Harry Potter, Wednesday, a Peaky Blinders shop right the way down there, and the building above it is where a lot of paranormal activity was meant to happen sort of around about 30-40 years ago. So a lot of things were being thrown around in that building, and workmen that were working up at the time would refuse to go in there to work because they felt that their tools were being thrown at them and that they'd be working away and things would become unplugged, and they turned around, they're working in that building on their own and the cable isn't tight, and all of a sudden their power tool stops working. When they look back, the plug's been pulled back and it's been brought right up behind them. So someone would literally have had to unplug it and take that cable right and put it right behind where they were standing. And there's nobody else in that building where they were working. So a lot of workmen would freak out. And this seems to be a common thing along that whole building set of Albert Dock. Walking through the bridges, or say walking through the main stretches, the square that goes around it, and you've got all the pillars. I remember this is where this morning had the weather map in the map. Well, that bloke turned out to be what he turned out to be, and that's gone now. But walking along those bridges, walking along that footpath under the arches, it gives you a sense of history. It gives you an unnerving feeling, because this is the site of where we have ghost children being seen, Victorian gentlemen being seen, and Victorian sailors being seen. Now, is this a time slip? I know there are reports of time slip along Albert Dock, where people will go there and they'll think they'll be in a restaurant that has never existed, or they'll go there and they have a conversation with a man on a boat and that boat has never been there, or not in modern times. Are these time slips that go on Albert Dock? Albert Dock's amazing, you know, it's a beautiful place. I mean, the only thing that haunted me while I was there was a seagull that kept trying to nick our chips. But I can imagine being along now, in the dead of night. We were there quite late, but there's still plenty of people around there. and it could be quite eerie. People live along in those boats in the river there. I would have loved to have gone down and spoken to those people and asked them what their feelings were about the ghost stories of Albert Dock. I'm sure some would have had brilliant stories, but as you walk along where the seagull was nicking the chips, you walk along that part heading down to where all the bars are. This is where we get these two children. These two children are seen walking up, and they are World War II dressed, so 1940s sort of style, and they're walking through our docks. What would two children be walking through that dockyard during World War II? It's a heavily bombed area. I do question that part of this story, but I'm assuming that not everyone got evacuated and the docks were busy. Could they actually even been working? Could they be doing a mission down there? You know, they were helping out on maybe on one of the ships, moving stuff around. During that time, I guess it's possible. But what happened to them? Why are these two children haunting along that pathway? We have the lady that come out of one of the shops along there, and she's walking down just after. Now this was when This Morning was still being filmed there, and some redevelopments were going on and stuff was sort of like starting to happen to redevelop the area of Albert Dock. She comes out of a shop, she's walking down now, this is broad daylight. Right in front of her she sees two children walking towards her, a boy and a girl, dressed in 1940s gear. First of all, like a lot of other people do, they think it's a fancy dress thing, and you'll see that a lot of ghost reports. People, their brain doesn't calculate what they're seeing first of all, and they try to rationalise it with, say, a fancy dress. And these two children are walking towards her, and she thinks they look a bit weird, and she said that they had the gas mask boxes. Again, a detail added that you don't really think about. It dates it gives a good date for these children. As she got closer to these children, she started to see through the children. They weren't solid, and the closer they got, the more she could see through the children. Eventually they disappeared before she got to them. A creepy encounter, definitely, but also one that I don't have an explanation for, because I can't find where these two children come from. Talking about fancy dress, Luke Litlow was playing darts up there when we was up there, and I've never seen so many bananas and all that in my life. Everyone was dressed up as bananas and sauce bottles and chips and Smurfs and Minions, and it was incredible. I had a very, very good time in Liverpool. I don't want to put people off from subscribing to my channel, but I went to a certain stadium team that I support, and we may have won the title the day after. I will say I wasn't there. I come home before that happened, but went to the changing rooms, and yeah. But I don't lose subscribers. Don't unsubscribe if you don't support that team. Yeah, I'm a fan of football. Was somebody put in one of my comments the other day. Yeah, but yeah, it was a fantastic time. Really enjoyed it. Liverpool is so interesting. It's got such a deep feeling of history, and this is only scratching. I've got one, Stanley Park, one more, right? Oh, actually, I've got another one, actually, right? So, first of all, the last one of Albert Dock, the Ghost Jaywalker. So, over one side of Albert Dock, near where the darts was taking place, just across the street, there's a road going down, and there's said to be a jaywalker that, when he crosses the road in front of people, when people call him out for it, he disappears. And there's loads of reports about this. This is crazy. So this is by far the most common reported ghost in Liverpool, Albert Dock area. So yeah, this, I can't believe I forgot about this. I'm like, sorry, it's been a long day. So yeah, so this ghost story is crazy. It seems that what happened in 1960, a man got run over and died on that road. Ever since, he's been cutting across the traffic, and anybody who approaches him to have a go at him, he just vanishes. How many times does this guy appear and nobody points it out to him? Is this ghost constantly repeating and you don't know it's actually a ghost, so you go up and have a go at him and then he vanishes? Is this like a time slip that is completely replaying all the time? Because there must have been 20-30 reports of this jaywalker where people go up to and he disappears. But Stanley Park, again, we have this man walking through Stanley Park and just fading out into nothing. We have the ghost of the lady walking over the bridge in Stanley Park. So she crosses over the water on the bridge, and as she comes down to the other side, she disappears. We have a couple where she was on one side of the lake with the dog and he was on the other side, and they were literally meeting up and going to meet up on the bridge. He gets overtaken by this woman walking along pretty fast, wearing quite old type clothing, and she crosses the bridge and his wife appears the other side. He goes, "Oh, did you see that lady?" "What lady?" "Didn't see her." And again, you know, he turned around and said, "Well, there's definitely a lady there. She come past me and went straight over as you was coming over the other side. You definitely would have seen her." "No, I didn't see nobody." Again, I can't find no explanation for that. Don't have details on who she was. Now, I know there's some long brick buildings at the back of Stanley Park where dark figures are seen moving along the back of there at night time. Again, I don't have much information on that, and that's not just through my lack of research, is that they're not documented. They are just people saying, "I was walking through Stanley Park one night and I was coming along the back path and these black shadows started moving across the wall, and one of them come out and sort of chased me," and that sort of stuff. They're the reports that we've got, that no real foundation on it. Again, Liverpool totally upped its game since I used to go up there and watch all the games all the time. Completely impressed by it. Went down to the cavern and walked along through there. That's an interesting one, and if you remember, I'll whack some videos of me walking through there, and I won't post one where some people are arguing, so you don't need to see that. But yeah, it's a beautiful place, very interesting to go to, and really recommend it. I recommend going on that little tour under the tunnels at the chapel. There's also a tunnel tour. You can go on these tunnels of the crypts all under Liverpool, all the secret tunnels under Liverpool. Recommend going on that, and yeah, it's just worth it. The museum there is fantastic. I could do a whole video on stuff that I found out in that museum, because that links into other maybe artifacts of ghosts that could come up onto, but I think this video is going on far too long and I'm going to be waffling now, and I get moaned at for waffling. But thank you again for your subscribing. As of tonight, we're on 3,900 subscribers, so nearly at the 4,000 mark. Again, thank you for hitting your notification bell, because that's really helped and that's really shown up in the stats. Still got more people watching my videos that are subscribed, so if you watch them and you like them, subscribe. If you watch them and you hate them, give me a thumbs down, because that helps my algorithm as well. If you don't like me, put a comment in my comment section, because that helps my algorithm as well. And yeah, fantastic. Look after yourselves. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.